r/AskReddit. Waiters/waitresses, what is the worst first date you've witnessed? This is off topic as I was never a waitress, but I was the person on a terrible first date. It was unusual, because he picked a very fancy location that was way out of town, like an hour drive. I normally prefer casual dates like walking in the park or coffee, but he insisted we go. I arrived first, and when I sat down I ordered a drink, strawberry lemonade. I don't drink alcohol, and was talking to the waitress saying I was waiting on a date. She was super nice to me and said, "Oh, I hope it's fun, good luck." Once he arrived, suddenly her mood shifted. She gave him an attitude when he ordered. He was trying to bully me into getting some alcohol, but I was firm and said I would stick to my strawberry lemonade. Throughout the date he kept trying to order me vodka. Waitress was being really weird and kept complimenting me and giving me free lemonades, refills every 2 minutes, and basically giving him dirty looks, and stayed close by, always watching. The guy was being a prick about the situation and started acting rude. I hope she's not gonna charge for those. He looked incredibly angry and uncomfortable. I was starting to wonder why this waitress was being so mean, so I went to the bathroom and waited to flag her down. She told me he goes there every other weekend with a new girl, and that the girls would walk out of there acting very drunk. She suspected he roofied them and wanted to make sure I was okay and kept changing my drinks to make sure I wouldn't get screwed up. I did confront him and demand he empty his pockets. He didn't have anything but admitted he gets girls drunk to sleep with him with pressure tactics. I took off right when he said that, and the waitress took me to my car. I made sure to give all the cash I had as a tip. I seriously love that waitress, and I'll never forget her. I worked as a waitress in an Italian restaurant while in uni in 2006. Obvious first date comes in. He's booked it and requested a table in a secluded area of the restaurant because the acoustics would be perfect. She arrives and asks to move table to by the window. No big deal. He's annoyed at this. They ordered a carafe of the house red with their meals. Anything she said he turned it into some achievement he'd already accomplished. He kept making comments about her order, such as how fattening a dish would be etc, and then proceeded to say his family owned a vineyard and he knew a good red wine when he smelt one. He then asked for the most expensive wine on the menu and to take away the what he called piss of a house wine, then talked about how the bouquet was different and the clarity was so much better on the expensive wine. When it came to dessert she had enough of his shit and flipped when he said that she shouldn't have any or she'd end up with stretch marks. She was a bit overweight, but not overly so. She stood up and yelled at him for being a condescending piece of shit, for knowing fuck all about wine, and dropped the coup de grace that her father was our wine supplier and that the house red was exactly the same as the most expensive wine, all of which was totally true. He was left speechless with the full check to pay. I had the shortest date table once. I knew it was a first date because I'd greeted the lady and directed her to the bar while she waited for her date to arrive, and then saw them introducing themselves. When he finally showed up, they ended up in my section. Her with an almost empty martini, him still drinkless. Looked like the small talk was going somewhat well. Normal first approach. Good evening, blah blah. What can I get you to drink, sir? He orders a Jack and Coke or something similar. I can't remember exactly, and I ask the lady if I can get her another. Before she has a chance to answer, the guy interrupts and says a water will be fine for her. Normally, I'd ignore a comment like that or pretend like I didn't understand and ask her directly again, but didn't even have a chance. She went off on him. How dare you? etc and stood up, apologized to the small dining room and to me, and walked out. Though clearly embarrassed and speechless, the guy stayed and continued to order dinner for himself anyway. Super awkward. Tipped me well though, if I remember correctly. I work at a cafe where we make cakes, sundaes, etc. It was a Friday evening, not to mention Valentine's Day was around the corner, and we get the usual busy crowd of couples and dates coming in for some desserts after dinner. I was bringing some food to the tables when I notice a couple come in. A woman dressed in a black dress, her hair done up all nice and fancy makeup, looking absolutely pissed. She's followed by a guy, dressed casually, on his phone, and isn't paying attention to where he's going. Stopping every FRW minutes to text. The girl makes her order, and every time she orders something she looks angrily at the guy, who just looks at his phone. Me and the cashier share a confused look at each other. She must have ordered about 10 things, and then went to go to her seat. As I prepare the slices of cakes and bowls of ice cream, and look over at their table everyone once in a while. The guy is slouching in his chair, still on his phone, and the girl is looking across the table at him with the glare of death. I bring them their cakes. As I set down the tray, the guy finally looks up from his phone. He opens his mouth to say something, then just goes back to staring at his phone. I go to turn to walk away. When I get back to the counter, the cashier put a hand on the shoulder and points over to the couple. I look back to see the woman gobbling down all pieces of cake. She's ignoring the provided silverware, and I don't even think she took a moment to breath. I had never seen anyone devour so many pieces of cake like it before in my life. The guy's watching with as much shock as us. My guess is the woman snapped and began to give zero fucks anymore. She walked to the counter with chocolate and cheesecakes me red on her face, looked at the cashier with crazy eyes, before slapping a $50 bill onto the counter. She left in a hurry, and the guy sat there for what felt forever, with his phone down. I worked at a diner and this guy came in to try to hit on one of my fellow servers. I was the only male server. Apparently they were talking, but she was too nervous to wait his table, so she asked me to. He made some joke to me that I didn't care about, but she thought was demeaning, so she started yelling at him, not really raising her voice but very irritated. As soon as she finished she ran off again and hid in the back. He didn't really know what to do, so he finished his meal and left a huge tip for me to impress her. Apparently she had an on-again off-again boyfriend. She had kids with him, which made dating hard for her because he was black and she wasn't, and apparently guys didn't want to date a girl whose kids obviously weren't theirs. I wouldn't have wanted to date her either, but not for that reason. She was pretty crazy and had to hide in the walk-in freezer her last day at work so her manager, also a female, wouldn't beat her up. I will look like a piece of shit, but fuck it, this was about 15 years ago. I was at a trendy restaurant late at night with a friend, and besides us, we had a couple that was on their first date. The girl was hot and had a very sexy voice which captivated me. I kept staring. That voice. At some point you could tell she was not interested. Twice she took calls and left the table. You could also tell the guy had figured it out, so he asks for the bill. Girl was still on the phone. Later I found out with a friend begging for a ride, so dude pays for the bill and vanishes. On our way out the girl was still waiting for a friend. I started chit-chatting, and damn did we connect, and we mostly connected at how cringy that date was. She almost pissed herself. We laughed for like an hour. I mean, me and my friend were half a feet away. It was like we were the third and fourth wheel, and that date was awkward as fuck. So she eventually tagged along. We met up friends at a nearby nightclub and we ended up dating for like 3 years. I don't know if this qualifies. However, I had to wait on a table of some pretty pretentious types. I have a really good memory, and if you tell me something I will make a mental note and remember. I could serve up to tables of 8 without messing up their orders, even not writing things down. So I get this couple and I tell them the menu /special /drinks special /etc, and the guy starts hassling me about not taking notes. I told him to not worry and there won't be any errors. He continues to harass me. Then he told me he'd only tip me if I didn't fuck up his order. I look at his date. She won't meet my eyes. And I just tell him, if there is a problem my manager is up in his office. It was literally 2 drinks, 2 appetizers, and 2 entrees. If my recall is that bad I shouldn't have ever worked in customer service. But it wasn't. Everything came out on time and as requested. He told me I didn't win. His date just looked mortified. Don't berate your waitstaff to sound big or important. You only end up looking like an ass. Not first date, But worst couple experience. A young man, maybe 19 or 20, rents out private dining room. It seats about 40 people. And invites his entire immediate family and his girlfriend's immediate family to dine. They are secluded and by themselves in the dining room. He then proposes to his girlfriend, who is the same age as him, in front of both of their entire families. The girlfriend obviously has no idea the boyfriend was about to do this and runs out of the room screaming and crying. Her mother says she'll never let them marry, and the would-be groom's father says some unkind racial remarks about the girlfriend's mother. Both sides of the family are completely baffled as to how to react and just stare daggers at each other from their respective sides of the dining room. Then the girlfriend's mother decides to get blackout drunk and falls over, knocking over one of the tables. Meanwhile, everyone keeps ordering food and drinks, expecting the boyfriend to pay for the meal, since he brought everyone there for his big surprise proposal. But because he's only 19 over 20 and mortified that his girlfriend rejected his proposal, he decides to bail and leave the bill for his dad to take care of. Needless to say, there were many split checks and very little in the way of tips. It was horrible and traumatic, and a night I'll never forget. When I was a host, I sat a couple in their mid-40s at the bar. Their server was my roommate, and she comes up to me, saying how weird they were, same siding, making out at the table, etc. A few minutes later, a pissed off looking man comes storming into the restaurant and stands at the host stand just looking around. I asked him if he needs a table, and he gives me a death glare and then marches over to the couple in the bar and sits down opposite of them. The woman looks horrified. The pissed off guys whisper, yelling at the woman. All I could make out was that she was on a date with a man she works with, and the pissed off guy was her husband, who found out through another friend. Now, I'm just standing at the host stand, 5 feet away, watching all this go down. I grab another server walking past me and tell them what's going on. The husband at the bar started getting louder, so my roommate gets the biggest cook we had and had him go to the table and tell them to leave. The woman and husband leave, leaving the other man there just looking confused. He sits there for a few minutes, just kind of staring down at all the uneaten food, before getting up and coming to the host stand to ask for his bill. I go get my roommate so she can print the check. When I come back, he pays and just says, "I'm sorry for the disturbance. I didn't know she was married," and leaves. I felt so bad for the poor guy. He seemed very into her up until her husband showed up. Couple in their mid-20s comes in. It's obviously a first date, but they seem to really like each other and are getting along well. I wasn't serving them, however. I was serving the table next to them. About halfway through their meal, I noticed them holding hands over the table. Cute. Then, the guy lifts her hand to his lips and kisses the back of it. A bit of an outdated gesture, but still cute, I guess. The woman seems slightly confused, but goes along with it. A little while later, I see the guy do it again. Okay, dude. Then again. Woman is confused and looks a little uncomfortable. They are no longer holding hands. I go to serve my table and see the dude full on making out with her hand, tongue and all. Woman looks extremely embarrassed and uncomfortable, looking everywhere but at her date. I go over and casually ask if they need anything, and the dude stops. Woman yanks her hand back. She left pretty soon after. This probably doesn't compare to some of these freak show stories, but I'll tell it anyways. I worked for IHOP for a very long 3 months. Most of my experiences were decent. On one occasion, one of my acquaintances came in with a date. We had been friends as kids and still sometimes chatted amicably. At this time, I had a stutter that would happen if I spoke too quickly, was stressed, or just trying to speak hard words. I went up to their table, said hi to my friend and her date, and instantly flubbed the greeting with a stutter. Honestly, my stutter has never bothered me, never felt like a bad thing until that moment. Her date looked at me, did that little condescending laugh that we've all heard before, and then repeated what I said while mocking my stutter. I could see my friend physically recoil from him, her face clearing, showing a "did you really just act that way" expression. At the time, I just brushed it off. It bothered me for about 2 seconds in the moment, but even years later I still haven't forgotten. Still, I could tell with that one little moment of ashlery, my friend was not gonna go on a second date with him. Oh man, thanks for asking this one. I've got a great one. Happened at my former restaurant. Reservation for 6 o'clock. Young guy comes in a few minutes early, tells me he's kind of nervous because it's a first date and he hasn't had many before. Blah blah blah, kind of sweet really. Anyways, girl arrives about half an hour late and proceeds to get very drunk. About midway through the meal, she answers her phone, takes the call, and starts talking about her date in front of her date, saying stuff like, well, he's not usually my type, I don't exactly like him, but I felt like why not, right in front of him. Young man looks so discouraged, walks up to me, pays his bill, and leaves. He's a really nice guy. He's come to the place I work at now a few times. Bartended for a decade. For a while I was at a medium range Italian restaurant. More than once I saw a first date go awry because one of the two drank too much. Most memorable was a woman who started downing rum punches. They were at a table, so I couldn't see them, and I guess the waiter had forgotten his red light, yellow light training. I don't know if they still do that. After the 6th one I asked if these were all going to the same person, and he said yes. I was like, oh shit. Sure enough, girl ended up puking all over my bathroom and locking herself in. When we got the door open she was passed out and there was puke everywhere including all over her. No cab would touch her, so the guy ended up taking her home. He came in a week later and said they were going on another date. I was skeptical. They've been married for about 15 years and are absurdly happy. She avoids rum punches. I work at a pretty high-end steakhouse. I got sat with a table of 2, and when I greeted them, I assumed they were a couple. It took them quite a while to order their food. I had to go back quite a few times and ask if they were ready. After an hour of them talking, ordering cocktails, and looking at the menu, they finally ordered. The woman ordered a filet mignon and the guy ordered our most expensive steak. Right before their food came out, I saw the guy get up and walk towards the bathroom. My coworkers ran their food to their table and the woman sat there with all the food in front of her. I thought he was coming back soon, but around 20 minutes went by and there was no sign of him. My manager walked over to me and asked me what was up with them. I said the guy was in the bathroom. My manager went and asked her if she wanted us to keep the food under the warmer. She said yes, and the food was under the warmer for maybe an hour while she sat at the table alone. I walked over to her and asked if everything was alright. She immediately broke down, said it was their first date and that they met on Tinder. Apparently she told him that a steakhouse was a little much for a first date and suggested coffee instead, but he said no. As they were sitting there talking, he looked at his phone and said my daughter has an emergency and he quickly got up and left. She was texting him after and he never replied. This girl pulled to me for 20 minutes, repeatedly saying what's wrong with me, and I had to reassure her he doesn't know what he's missing blah blah. I went over to my manager and asked what we should do about the check. He said he was stuck because it was a $250 tab and that's too much to just not have her pay. After a few minutes of convincing him, I got him to take everything off the bill. I boxed up all the food, including his steak and sides, brought it over to her, and told her to enjoy her night. She stopped crying, thanked me, and left. After writing this, I'm now wondering if they swindled me. Not a waiter but me and my GF sat next to an obvious first date at a Pan-Asian fusion restaurant, Zen in Durham, UK. She comments that her main course wasn't quite what she expected and thought it'd be spicier. He then snaps his fingers above his head very loudly so half the restaurant turns round to look, and a waitress rolls her eyes and goes over. He demands that they cook it again and make it hotter. Next thing, there's half a dozen Thai waitresses around the table calling him worse than shit in Thai. My Thai GF translated, causing a massive scene, while her face turns red, and they take her plate away. She then has to sit with no food, while he continues eating. He eventually realizes he's fucked up and stops eating, but she sarcastically tells him to enjoy his food. They brought her a fresh plate and they eat in silence. First and I'm sure the last date. Couple years ago, I was tending bar at a high-end steak joint. A pretty brunette walked in and sat down at the bar. After fixing her a cocktail, I asked if she'd like to see a dinner menu. She explained that she was waiting for a date. A few moments later, the guy arrived carrying a large bag. It was immediately obvious this date was their first. Their conversation was lurching from forced to downright painful when he reached into the bag and pulled out an album containing his Pokemon card collection. He set the book on the bar and thumbed through each page, thoroughly and lovingly describing every card, attempting to educate his date in the ways of Japanese pocket monsters. I'll be fair to the guy, dude was passionate. She feigned an emergency and called her friend to pick her up. He stayed and ate a plain hamburger at the bar. Edit. Both of these people were in their mid-30s. Work at a bubble tea restaurant right near a college. It's a nice hangout spot with dim lighting, comfortable furniture, and board games. A lot of first dates happen here. Probably the worst I'd ever seen was this guy that looked somewhere between 17 and 19 years old who met up with this girl around the same age. They got teas and took a seat at a table and played a board game and talked. His mother sat at the table next to him the entire time and just stared them down. It made me feel so bad for him, but the icing on the cake is when she goes up to them at 8:30 and tells them that it's time for the two of them, her and her son that is, to head home. The guy is visibly pissed, but says goodbye to her and follows his mom out. Girl comes up to order another tea and I asked her about it. She was more than happy to fill me and the other girls in. This lady had essentially injected herself into the date, interrupting their conversation and critiquing her son's behavior. I had a two-top in a small booth, and across from them was a family of 6. The two-top was in their mid-40s, maybe 50. I was delivering food to the 6-top, and I was being berated for not using legs with my big trays, so I grabbed a pair and headed off. When I was setting them down, a stacked plate on my tray shifted to the side and the whole tray pitched toward the 6-top. I panicked and tried to stop it from falling and it all went backwards off the tray. Unluckily I didn't hear a single plate shatter. I turned around and the woman at the top had rib sauce on her face, mashed potatoes in her bust, and broccoli all over her lap. I started with, "I'm so sorry ma'am. Please stand up and we'll get you cleaned up." My 6-top was forgotten at that moment. I pleaded with her to get up so we could clean her off. Someone produced a towel for me. I had 2 managers trying to help. She was so polite and insistent that it was nobody's fault. Her husband finally said, "At least wipe the sauce off your face." And she laughed and got up. Everything was comped on their ticket including alcohol. It was the only tray I ever dropped, and they never made me use legs again. They came back in and asked for me the next week. The husband told me they were celebrating 30 years together that night. I felt horrible. Then he told me on their first date she made spaghetti and accidentally dumped it in his lap. He told her it was karma and they had a huge laugh and a free meal. Bartender here. So I used to work at a place that was well known for our wings, not BWW. I had what was obviously a Tinder date. Belly up. I greeted everyone and got the ball rolling. After few drinks, I could tell they were very obviously into each other. I was happy that they were happy. But, as we all know, shit happens. And it was about to happen literally. I make a pass back their way and ask if they want to do another round. They both eagerly agree, and while I'm making their drinks I hear the guy say, "What do I have to do for a kiss?" AWW cute. The girl thinks for a second and then says, "Eat a spoonful of their spiciest sauce." When I come back with their drinks, he asks me for a side of our hottest sauce. I tried so hard to talk him out of it. When that didn't work, I did the only other thing I could do and grabbed my cook to witness this idiotic move. Cook brings out the sauce and gives it to the guy. We warn him one more time that this is an awful idea. Guy shrugs us off and tips back the little ramekin. Things were fine at first. Tears were streaming down his face. I got him some milk. I think we are over the worst of it after 5 minutes pass. I was wrong. Dude kicks off his shoes, stands up, and runs to the back of the bar. As he is running, Pooh starts escaping his pant leg and leaves a trail all the way to the bathroom. I couldn't believe it. He refused to come out until his date left. He never got the kiss. I just cannot believe this guy had the forethought to take off his shoes before he publicly shit his pants. To be fair, they were really nice kicks. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.